This is the Chris Logsdon Leadership Podcast. On this show, we discuss all things leadership. The show's mission is to lead, inspire, and equip people to be greater today than yesterday. Now, here's your host, Chris Logsdon.
Hey, Ryan King is on today. Ryan, thanks so much for being willing to join the podcast today.
Hey, you're welcome, man. I'm glad to be a part of it.
Yeah, so this is episode 2, number 2 of the Chris Logsdon Leadership Podcast. And my goal with this podcast is just to be an extension of what my life mission, my life goal is, and that is to lead, inspire, and equip people to be greater today than yesterday. So I hope that if you're listening to this podcast, when you walk away today, that hopefully we inspired you, equipped you to be better today than yesterday. So Ryan King, he's Ryan, you and I have a few acquaintances, a few mutual friends, and have kind of met through that way.
Yeah.
And I have followed you for the last year or so. But I'll share a little bit about you, and then you can expand on that. But obviously, as a father and a husband, you own a small business. I believe you do some credit card processing. And I didn't know this about you, but you've been semi-retired since about age of 35. So that's interesting. I'll be 40 next year. I'll be 39 this next month. So I wish I could say that, but that's not something I can say. So that's a pretty good goal there that you've attained.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't call it retired, per se, but the business that I happen to be in, just the way that it's monetized, it kind of just stacks and builds and has that residual payment element to it. So for me, when I bought the business, I built it for several years, just me and one other person, and it was 80 hours a week working like crazy. And when I bought the business, my first really goal was, okay, now it's time to replace myself. I'm ready to hire people to do what I've done so that I can take a step back. And so after I bought the business, I spent several years kind of getting the right people in the right positions. And so now, I'm still the president of the company and things like that, but I've got people doing most of the day-to-day legwork, running the business. And so it's just kind of freed me up to pursue a lot of the things that I am passionate about and that I really care about, and that I feel like will actually make a contribution to the world, and trying to make it a better place. So
Yeah, man, that's amazing, and that's what's intrigued me about you. As I've got to know you and followed you the last this last year, and then even into this year. But what I kind of wanted to talk about today, really the kind of the main point is you are in the process of writing a book.
yes.
And are you self-publishing that book, I believe?
Well, right now I've been kind of going back and forth on a lot of it. As I've researched a lot of the self-publishing side of things, it talks about how important it is to market it yourself. And even if you're not self-publishing, even publishing in general, a lot of the burden of marketing and building an audience and all that falls on the author. And so I've kind of transitioned a little bit to Instagram, where I'm doing a lot of writing on Instagram about the topics that I'm going to talk about in the book, and trying to build an audience that way. And from what I've seen, a lot of people have, once you've built a big following on Instagram, it's easier to get a deal with an actual publisher.
Gotcha.
So I'm kind of thinking that's the route I want to go if the Instagram thing works. And the interesting thing is I'm finding that the format of Instagram and the way you have to be concise with your points, and you're limited on how many slides you can post and things like that.
Right.
It's helped me really refine a lot of the ideas that I want to write about in the book too. It's making me a better writer. So that's kind of what I've been doing, and I've really only been doing that for about two months. As far as the Instagram thing, I'd never really been on Instagram before, but the reception's been just overwhelming. It's been way better than I ever would have expected. So
Right.
um, that's kind of my deal right now. Is I'm pre-writing the book through a lot of the concepts I'm bringing up through Instagram, and then hopefully that'll kind of build an audience for the book. And whether I self-publish or find a traditional publisher, um, have a lot of that pre-written and a lot of that audience built
Right. Yeah, and
in that way.
that's where I followed a lot of it is on Instagram and reading it, and I can't wait for it. I can't wait for it to come out. So you're gonna have to when you get it ready, you're gonna have to send me a copy before it gets released
I
so
will.
I can read
I
it. So,
will.
but
Definitely.
the book, this book, I would love to write a book. That's one of my long term goals. So it's been interesting to watch you, but this book really from my understanding, is just kind of, if you will, a modern day Proverbs, just kind of for men and things like that. You took this; it's just a collection of wisdom, that you've had your whole life, and you want to pass on to your boys, and
Yeah.
um, and so there's not a lot of books geared toward that. And so, kind of share, if you will, a little bit, expound on that and share a little
Sure.
bit about exactly kind of how all this took place.
Yeah. So I'll try to make it brief. There's kind of a lot that really goes into it to flesh it out. But ever since I was 35, like I said, I've been kind of just in between. My business that I do, that I built, isn't really fulfilling in terms of like my creative expression. It's a job and it pays well and does well, and I'm interested in it, but it's not something that it's easy to be passionate about. And so for me, when it was time to step away, when I was at 35, I went through several years of just kind of almost like just a very mild form of PTSD, where I'd spent so many years working so hard to build my business. It was almost like there weren't any fires to put out anymore, and I didn't know what to do with myself. So I had several years where I went through just kind of a pretty bad bout with just kind of depression and just not really knowing what I wanted to do and things like that. And I guess over the course of the past year, um, as people within my vicinity, have just kind of seen from stuff I've posted on Facebook and different things, like, you know, um, they've just kind of seen that my life is in a different spot than most people um, at my age. And so I've had a lot of people just kind of start coming out of the woodwork for the last year, just kept saying, "Hey, can we go to lunch? I want to pick your brain. Can we talk about this stuff?" Um, and so I've gotten a lot of feedback over the last year of, man, you need to do something. You need to speak up. You need to write a book. You need to start a podcast. You need to do something. And so that's kind of been part of it, was just having people around me say, "Hey, you've got something to say. You need to say it." And then, another part of my motivation is just seeing, you know, everything that's going on with the world and just how dysfunctional it's gotten. And, um, it's easy to sit on the sidelines and be a critic about all that. And I find myself doing that, just getting frustrated and griping a lot. And um, I just decided I'm tired of sitting on the sidelines and griping and not trying to do something about it. So that's
Right.
another part of my motivation for writing the book, is just, I don't know how big it'll be. I don't know that I'm going to change the world or anything like that. I have no idea how any of that's going to work, but I don't want to be a critic. I love that Teddy Roosevelt line about the man in the arena, and I memorized that like in high school. Now it's trendy. I see it everywhere, but like I've had that memorized since I was 2001,
Right. Right.
before social media.
Yeah.
And I found myself just kind of, dude, you're being a critic. You need to get in the arena and do something about it. And so that was part of my motivation. And So I just was kind of playing with this, with ideas of what I could offer and what I could contribute. And so I just started looking up, books on wisdom. I went to Amazon and I just said wisdom books, and there was like one. Everything was just like, you know, everything about wisdom was just, commentaries on the book of Proverbs or
Right.
something. It was biblical. Like there's nothing about just like straight up wisdom. And so, um, for me, I've got two young sons, and I remember, as I was leaving college back in, 2005, I remember just being like, I'm about to be like a grown man and I'm not prepared at all. I have no idea what to do. My dad knows how to do all this stuff and I don't know how to do any of it.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I didn't want my kids to be in that same position. So I've actually had an Evernote going on my phone for, you know, gosh, probably 11 years. And just,
I love Evernote.
yeah, it's great. And
Yeah.
I'm a big note taker, it helps me. Um, and so I've had an Evernote going on my phone for probably 11 years. And, because my kids at the time, my oldest son's 13, my younger one's 11. Most of the stuff that I'm excited to teach them, they're still not old enough to really understand, and,
Right.
and so as I learn something, I'm like, okay, well, it's going to be like 15 freaking years before I actually get to teach this stuff to them. I don't want to forget, because as I'm learning it, I'm like, oh, okay, they need
Yeah.
to know that too. And so that's where a lot of the content comes from, is just lessons that just as I've learned them throughout my adult life, I've kind of just more like a journal almost, just kept a running Evernote of just concepts and ideas that I wanted to teach them, and I teach them in my business too, so I've articulated them and stuff before, um, and so that's where a lot of the content and stuff comes from, is just it's really just life lessons and a lot of just reflection on. Um, I just do a lot of thinking. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. I don't listen to a lot of music. At night when I have some free time, my wife kind of makes fun of me because she'll come downstairs and I'll be sitting in my library and I'm just staring at the wall, and she's
Hmm.
like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, I'm figuring stuff out. I'm thinking through things, um, and the really interesting thing that I've found as I've started writing is that a lot of that, you know, I can't speak for everybody, but I have a pretty good feeling that most everybody feels anxious and frustrated at the world. We scroll our social media feeds, and it's like it just irritates us so
Oh
much to
yeah.
see all the stuff that's going on. And man, for me, it's been so therapeutic just to write, because I'm not consuming anymore. I'm producing, and
Right.
whether I'm making an impact or not, it's therapeutic to feel like you're making an impact.
I think that's key. I like that. You said I'm producing. I'm no longer consuming, and
Yeah.
I think the biggest problem with our world today is uh, we want most people want to just be consumers. Nobody really wants to be that producer, um,
Yeah.
and so when
It's
nobody
hard.
it
It's
is,
really hard. I
but
mean,
when nobody's producing that content that we want to consume, then we
we're
just
we're left with the content that sucks,
right,
that pisses us
exactly.
off, that
Yeah.
irritates us, and that's been a long time. I'll be honest, man. It's been a long time since I felt, um, self-doubt and, um, like, insecurity. It's been a long time since I felt that way.
Right.
But producing, writing, producing something that's, considered creative or artistic, it's like you're putting a piece of your soul out into the world. Like it's easy to just make comments on other people's posts and stuff, but when you really write something that means a lot to you and you put it out in the world, and people don't engage or whatever, it's like, man, this is a whole different level of like stepping out of my comfort zone
Oh
for
yeah,
sure.
and I
you know
mean, even for me, the beginning of this year, I started doing some weekly mindset minute videos, and I was really kind of surprised because I got a lot of likes, but I didn't get a whole lot of interaction, and I think at this point right now, there's a limited number of us, myself and you included, that are not happy with where we're at, not happy with where things are at, and so we want to move forward. But there's so many people that are just content with where they're at, and so I don't understand that. I don't get that mentality, and
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know how to change that mentality. I hope that maybe through this podcast and through your
yeah.
book and whatever else that we can begin to change that. But so many people, the society today is just comfortable, um, and
It's definitely an uphill battle.
I don't like being
Definitely,
comfortable.
yeah,
To a sense, yes, we all like being comfortable, but I like being challenged, and I like new
yeah,
challenges, and so, um,
yeah.
it's
Well,
been
I think it's an
interesting.
uphill battle because you hear the old 80-20 rule. I think it's becoming more and more of like the 95-5 rule. I think something about
Right,
social media has changed that, and the internet has changed that. And so, when it comes to building that audience and getting the engagement, I'm learning that, you know, if 100 people see your stuff, only five of them are even going to care,
right,
you know. So the trick is, you know, how do you get it big enough so that that 5% of people is still a big enough audience that you have impact.
right.
I mean, that really is the trick. And then I I try to be optimistic because I feel like for my mental health, I need to be optimistic. I think there's, of that 95.5, I think there's, another 10 or 15% of people that would like to be challenged, um, that would embrace, self improvement and all that stuff. But we're fighting an uphill battle because there's just so much comfort to be had. Like everybody wants to be comfortable, but it's also like you talked about consuming. Like they're, most every business is geared towards making us more comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Amazon makes it so easy for us to buy things. Like everything is so easy. So I think that's a part of the uphill battle too. Is the cultural side of just we're living in an age and in a society where we've been so successful that you know we have the option of being comfortable
Right.
more than at any other point in history. So it really is an uphill battle for finding those people and then getting people that are used to things being comfortable to be uncomfortable, because that's yeah, you have all these people that love being comfortable, but if you look at the statistics on, life satisfaction, we're less satisfied as a society than we've ever been in human history, while at the same time having more comforts than we've ever had.
Yeah,
So I
exactly.
don't, I don't think that that's an accident. As human beings, what drives us, what fulfills us, what gives us satisfaction is overcoming challenges and growth. That's why the people that have been through it, like you and I, are so addicted to that process, because there's no better feeling than pitting yourself up against something and overcoming it.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. And at the time of this recording, we're in the first couple weeks of March, and I was on a business trip to Charlotte, North Carolina, this week, and on my flight back to Northwest Arkansas, I sat next to a lady, and we got to talking, and very similar discussion about being comfortable, and where we're at. And we then got on the topic, geopolitics, and I know you like that as well. But we got to
Mm-hmm.
talking about what's going on in Ukraine right now and this crisis in Ukraine. And she said, here I am sitting on the airplane, and I bought the internet on the airplane so that I could do work on this 2.5 hour flight, and it's not working. And she said I get frustrated and I want to get mad about it. And she said, but then I look at what's going on in Ukraine, and these people are, literally fighting for, fighting for their life.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, and I read and watched an interview with a couple of ladies in Ukraine, and they were in their 60s or 70s, and they were asked, hey, are you going to leave? Are you going to take the comfortable way out? And
Mm-hmm.
the one lady said no. She said, this street corner right here, this curb right here, this is my curb. This is my town, my community. She said, I will die fighting for my
Yep.
community,
Hmm.
and she had the option to leave, and she's like, no. And I think that goes back to the, just being comfortable, that we don't really understand and get how easy we have it here, and
And how unhealthy it is for us to have it
correct,
that easy.
correct. We're
That to
the
me is the part that people don't understand. It's like,
yeah,
I think a lot of I've had this joke with my wife. I'm always trying to look at things. I'm very contrarian, so I'm always playing devil's advocate. And a lot of people, all of my liberal friends think I'm conservative. All my conservative friends think I'm liberal. It's like I'm not anything. I just play
right,
devil's advocate with everything, with my own thoughts,
yeah,
until I feel like I find what makes the most sense, no matter what direction you come at it from. So when it comes to things like our comfort, you know, to me, I have this theory of like, it's like there's this reverse proportion to, how serious your problems are versus how easy your life is, because as human beings, we can't ever just be okay.
right,
Something's always got to be wrong, you know, so many, and you hear the word first world problems, like pretty much everything we fight about in America 200 years ago, nobody had time to even be thinking about.
right,
You know what I mean? Like the fact that we have time to sit and ponder, you know, and I'm not going to pick on any one specific topic, but we all know which topics are divisive that everybody's arguing about.
right,
The fact that we have time to sit and ponder those things and argue about them in the first place means that our life is already pretty freaking amazing in
mm-hmm.
comparison to how most human beings have lived throughout history.
Oh yeah,
Like the fact that you have time to sit and think about, did my dad love? And I'll pick something just innocuous because I'm not trying to start controversy. Like, did my dad hug me enough? You've heard that.
right,
You got daddy issues because my dad didn't hug me enough or whatever. Like 200 years ago, you didn't have time to worry about that. Like you were worried about, are locusts going to come eat my crop?
mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's starving
right,
to death for the winter. So
yeah,
the fact that we have time to sit and ponder all these things that hurt our feelings, or that we worry about or whatever, means that we already have amazing lives in comparison to human history. Just the fact that we have free time, like vacations, like summer vacations didn't exist until like the last 60 years.
right.
Like nobody in human history has ever been like, where are you going on vacation this summer?
Yeah,
Never.
right. But we
You
stress
know,
about we get upset about, hey,
yeah.
where are we going to go this summer for vacation, and then we get it's like
The fact that you even have the vocabulary in your mind for a week that you just get to go have fun and spend
right.
money and not work. The fact that there's even a word for that in
Yeah,
the context of human history is mind blowing.
right. Oh
It
yeah.
really is.
No, I agree. I agree
Yeah.
totally. I agree totally. But we're I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see at the even at the end of the year, if we're all still here, at the end of the year, kind of look back, on this first quarter, and look back at the end of the fourth quarter and be like, how much has changed. I mean, I know this week even gas prices have went up, like 80 cents, just in
No,
a
it's
few days, so
it's unreal.
but so what one thing that I'll say to vouch for that I see in what you said about just kind of your reason for writing the book and stuff is for anybody that follows you on social media on Instagram, and we'll talk about that at the end, where how people get a hold of you, but I can tell you that I see that. I see your post with your boys and the things that you do, and what you're writing about. You truly are living that with your boys, and so just some encouragement to you on that. That I do
Oh, I
notice
appreciate it,
that.
man.
I
Yeah.
do notice that, and it's noticed, and I know that you don't do it for, hey, look at me, but it is noticed that what you write about, and even it's interesting how, and there's no way to plan it, but you may post some ideas, on Instagram from your book, and then you had something with your son that week, and you post about how they correlated. And I know there was absolutely no way to plan that,
Yeah,
and it's just the way that it worked out. So,
yeah.
what's the top 5 books on your reading list,
Um,
or do you have a top 5?
as far as on my reading list, like to be read or stuff that I've
It,
already read.
whether it doesn't matter whether it's to be read or that you've already read.
Um, last year, my favorite book that I read was the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. I've seen a lot of people reading that one. Man, that guy, you talk about writing, like he's a genius. He can write in one sentence what it takes me, 3 paragraphs to write. I mean,
Right.
it's just, and that to me is the essence of a good writer or a really intelligent person is, how simple can they make a complicated idea? How simple can they make it? And then that Naval Ravikant, that book, I mean, every sentence you could screenshot it and quote it and share it on social media. It's just gold. Um, I'm reading I'm reading the biography of Teddy Roosevelt right now, that 3-volume series. I really like him. You know, I get that a lot about the books, and I do read a lot of books. But personally, so many of the books that I've read are fiction.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and like I grew up, the first book my dad ever read, the only book my dad ever read to me was The Hobbit. Like
Okay.
before I could read.
Yeah.
And so that got me into fantasy and Lord of the Rings and books like that. And for me, I'm like I said, I'm contrarian. I just think there's a lot to be gotten out of fiction. Um, one of the things that I try to do, as far as to tie that into what you just mentioned about Instagram, with I'm not just writing about stuff, I'm living it too, and I'm trying to show both that I'm a real person, and this is me living my life in front of you. Like, here's how to model it. And I just think part of the problem with our society is we don't have enough role models, and the ones that we do have are the wrong ones. And I think for me, reading fiction stories, all of my role models have been fictional characters, and so that's what I've gotten a lot out of in a lot of the books that I've read, is just kind of this idea of like, what kind of man do I want to be,
Yeah.
and seeing that in a lot of fictional stories, I think has helped define a lot of that for me. Um, I don't read a lot of like self-help books, because I find that it's easy to think outside the box when you don't know what the box is.
Right.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And I find that the more I read self-help books, the more I try to follow their recipe, as opposed to figuring out my way of doing it,
Yeah.
thinking through it and reflecting on it,
That's interesting. I've never been a big fiction reader. I like the nonfiction. So I'll have to
yeah,
I'll
and
definitely have
that's
to
pretty common.
I'll definitely have to take a look at that, and see.
That's
So
pretty common with
um,
men. Men like
yeah.
nonfiction. They like how to,
Yeah.
and I get that a lot. I'm part of a lot of like just random book groups and stuff on Facebook, and like all the women overwhelmingly read fiction.
Yes. My
Men
wife and my daughter
overwhelmingly,
both.
yeah, men overwhelmingly read nonfiction. But
And
for me, it's not like I'm not just reading it like I'm watching a movie. I'm reading it, and like when I read a fiction, so for instance, a good example, I read a book last year called Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield, and it's a historical fiction novel of the Battle of Thermopylae, from the movie 300. Like the movie 300 was based off of this book,
okay.
so it's an older book. Um, but you want to talk about just print concepts of the old-fashioned principles of things like honor and integrity and bravery and courage and brotherhood and all these things. I mean, yeah, you can read it like it's a movie and just be like, hey, that's got cool action scenes, or you can read it and say, man, those are real men. Those are qualities that I want to admire, that I want to bring back, you know. And so I think if you read fiction with that intent, you can get a lot out of it that you can't get out of nonfiction, you know, because nonfiction is realistic, you know,
Yeah.
fiction is unrealistic, but it's also aspirational. You know, it's like, you know what? I know most men aren't honorable like that, but reading this makes me want to be one.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, that's
you know,
definitely a good way to look at it. I haven't thought about that, but my wife and my daughter are both, um, they love the fiction, and I have just not been able. Even the fiction movie, so they like the Marvel and all of that, and I just haven't been able to get into it. But that's an interesting way to look at that, especially from the reading perspective. So I'll
hmm
I'll have to I'll have to
I've gotten a lot out of it. I've got a
yeah
lot of the ideas. You know, if you're reading it from that angle, like there's a lot of good lessons to be learned through the story. That you know, it takes thought. You know, it's not spoon fed to you like that. Like you really got to chew on it to get that part of it out.
yeah
Um, but there are, you know, to use your example of Marvel, you know, like, you know, you can just watch an action movie, but you can also look at Captain America's behavior and say, man, that's a man worthy of admiration. You know, you can use
right
him as a role model
yeah
because of his character and because of his beliefs and the way that he's stuck to, you know, he stuck to what he knew to be right, even when it wasn't popular. Like that's something that we need in the world. We need men that step up and do the right thing, even if it costs them something. You know, even if it means sacrificing.
yeah
You know, and so I think, you know, do most people get that out of watching a Captain America movie? Probably not.
Probably not. Yeah.
You
One thing
know,
though that
but
I've done a few times, not with Captain America, but I've just taken a movie to watch, just whatever movie it is. And I don't watch a whole lot of movies, but I noticed and I enjoyed it, that I would just sit down there with my notebook and I would watch the movie, and if there was just for instance, like you brought up with Captain America about his being noble and whatever, and I just kind of wrote down different points that and different thoughts from different parts of movies, and I can't give you any examples off the top of my head right now, but and then I took them back and really kind of fleshed them out, and
mhm.
just a movie that had zero purpose for being for leadership or whatever else, but yet there were those points in there, those instances, and I was
Mhm.
able to write those down and then kind of flesh those out. So I have
Yeah, and
enjoyed I have enjoyed doing that.
so. You know, and I think for me, it's like part of the reason I can't read nonfiction is because when I read it, like I feel like I say can't read. Part of the reason I don't read a lot of the nonfiction self help stuff is because it's like I feel like I got to go implement all this tomorrow. You know, like
Right.
it's almost like it's overwhelming. Whereas, you know, long before I was trying to become, you know, a good businessman or a good father, whatever. Like, I was the kid. Like, I was the jock. You know, I played college baseball, but like I got made fun of because I would bring a book on the road trips and I'd be sitting and reading a book on road trips and stuff. You know, so I was kind of had one foot in both worlds. But you know, for me, I think the thing about fiction is that you kind of accidentally soak up a lot of lessons that you don't feel like you have to learn.
Yeah.
It's just exposure, you know. And I think that that's influenced me a lot, you know. Whereas, man, reading a nonfiction book, it feels like school. Like I need to take notes, I need to memorize, I need to do all this stuff. And so I think it's like a conscious versus subconscious thing, you know. Like I think a lot of reading the fiction and watching certain types of movies, it affects your subconscious just with being, you know, you become what you're exposed to. You know, we all do. We can't help it. And so
Right.
when you expose yourself to stories of, you know, men with honor and integrity and heroism and courage and sacrifice and, you know, when you just expose yourself to that stuff, it starts leaking off onto your own values. You
Yeah.
know, like, you
But
know,
what's sad about that is that books on men with honor and integrity and values are listed in the fiction section. That's the worst
yeah,
part. That's the
yeah.
worst part about it.
Well,
Like
there's
I
biography. Like
I
I said,
know
I've
I
written
know
the
I know there's
biographies and
I
stuff,
know
but
there's
yeah, but
biographies and stuff, but I'm saying Captain America. I
yeah.
mean that's a fictional thing, but everything about him it should be shouldn't be fiction. So,
Yeah.
kind of moving away then from the author side of things. I want to kind of talk about just as far as how leading and reading, how you see that kind of go together. And Harry Truman, um, if you Google anything about leaders being readers or whatever else, this quote always kind of comes up at the top of the list. And Harry Truman said, "Not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers." What do you think about that quote?
Oh man, I'm gonna get on my soapbox about that stuff. I mean, I actually had a post that I wrote on Instagram about this not too long ago about, you know, going to the gym, you know, reading is going to the gym for your brain.
Right.
Period. I mean, there's no, and I would add in writing too,
Yes.
as
Yeah.
like
Oh yeah.
an
I would put
advance, you know, like
I would put reading and writing
yeah.
together.
I think reading is like introductory level, and then writing is like advanced, like master's degree, you know.
Yeah.
But if you want to be a critical thinker, if you want to be able to express yourself, if you want to be able to process thoughts, you know, which a lot of men can't do that. A lot of men, especially, cannot express themselves. They cannot be articulate. They have a very difficult time, um, explaining and communicating their thoughts. They can talk about football. They can talk about weather. But when it comes to talking about anything with depth, men have a very hard time verbalizing those conversations, um, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
It's a big problem.
Most
In,
definitely.
in today in today's modern world, we don't. It's not necessary still to be able to know how to hunt. It's a good skill to have, but you don't have to. You can get along just fine in the modern world without knowing how to hunt.
Right.
You can get along just fine without a lot of those skills, but you have a very difficult time being successful and effective as a human being in the modern world when you cannot articulate yourself. Period.
Yeah.
It is the most important skill to have in the reality of what we live in today. And not being able to read and understand what you're reading is, that's, you have to be able to do it. I mean, it, you're at such a huge competitive disadvantage if if you're not a reader and you can't read and process information, and I think, I have a lot of reasons. This has pissed me off since I was like in high school, because everybody would make fun of me for reading. And I'm like, y'all just don't get it, man. Like, yeah, part of the reason everybody hates reading is because in school they make you read the Scarlet Letter and all these terrible books that nobody is interested in. You can barely understand as a 10th grader. Like, read like that's in the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, the book that I recommended earlier. He said, just read anything. Read comic books. Read literally. It doesn't matter what you read. It's just exercise for your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Just read anything. And yeah, I mean, it very, very much frustrates me. And I think a lot of the reason reading is viewed as it is because we have the wrong perspective on it.
Yeah.
I mean, when I got into the business world, it's one of those things. Is it nature versus nurture? I don't know. Maybe I would have been fine either way. I know I've read 2,000 books in my life, at least. I mean, I read all the time. And when I got into the business world, I knew how to communicate. I knew how to make points. I knew how to be persuasive. I knew how to write emails, persuasive business email, all this stuff. And I would have people like, how do you know how to do this when you're like 25 years old? I'm like, I don't know. I never learned this anywhere. Like, the only thing I can think is that it came from reading.
Yeah.
It's the only difference that I know of between me and every other 25-year-old is most 25-year-olds have read 3 books, and I've read 300 this year.
Yeah.
It's the only thing I can think of, I know when it came to test taking, I made a 29 on my ACT, and dude, I barely passed high school because I didn't even care about. I mean, I made terrible grades, and everybody was like, "How did you make such a good grade on the ACT?" I was like, "Well, when you have time to go through it 3 times." Like, what do you mean go through it 3 times? Like, most people couldn't even finish it because they couldn't read fast enough. I read fast enough that I went through the whole thing 3 times and checked my work. It's easy. If it wasn't timed, it would be a very easy test.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
so just that alone gave me opportunities to go to colleges and open doors for me just from making a good score on a test that I wasn't even prepared for. It was basically untimed for me because I knew how to read. So I mean, yeah, as far as readers or leaders and all that stuff, I mean, I could talk about reading for hours. It's mind blowing to me, how wrong everybody is on reading and how to read
Yeah.
in a way that's effective. Like I just think it's funny. People are like, "Oh, I can't remember what I'm reading." I'm like, "What was the last movie you watched?"
And they
And
remember
they'll tell me
everything
that.
about it.
And no, I'm like, what color was his shirt in in the scene in the first 30 minutes? What color was his shirt? Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
Verbally repeat for me word for word the dialogue from the end of the movie. I don't remember any of that. So are you bad at watching movies? Because you can't remember every single. Does that mean you're bad at watching? Well, no, I'm not bad at watching movies. Then why do you think you got to do that with a book? You don't.
Right.
What do you have the wrong expectation. Like
Yeah.
school has completely warped what you expect to get out of reading. Like
That's
you're
why.
putting
Yeah.
pressure. You're
Yeah.
putting pressure on yourself. That's not. It just doesn't even apply.
Yeah. That's why when I read, I have a highlighter in my hand. Um, and I'll read stuff and I'll highlight. You see all of my books, any of the books that I've read, they're highlighted like crazy, just because there's those parts that uh, I do want to remember, and so I'll highlight them, and then I can always pull that book back and thumb through and find those highlighted points, and that makes it a
Hmm.
little bit easier. But I also have a similar. I don't have use an Evernote for it, but I do in my iPhone. I have in my notes deal whether I'm reading something, whether I see something, whether it's on a podcast or whatever else, stuff that I write down, and um, it's super long too. I've been doing that for probably the last year and a half, so I can't imagine having 15 years worth of stuff. You know,
Yeah, it's a
um,
lot.
yeah.
It's
So
overwhelming.
kind of segue in from what you just talked about. Dave Olson. Dave is kind of a leadership consultant, but he wrote an article, and I found this article interesting. That really goes with the quote that Harry Truman said, and I think it really goes along with what you've talked about as well. But he talked about 5 reasons why all leaders are readers. And his first point says, reading elevates us above our current situation. And he goes on to expand it and say, it's easy to get bogged down in our day to day lives, but reading elevates us above the daily grind. It can inspire us with stories of great accomplishments. It also gives us new ideas. And I think you're a classic example of that. You talked about how did you know how to do all this stuff at 20 and 25 years old, and with the reading, and
Hmm.
I wonder how much better our leaders would be if they became readers. Um,
Yeah.
so that's
Um,
interesting.
yeah.
Any thoughts on that one? There's 5, so that's the first one. Any thoughts on that one?
Um, I certainly think, one of the problems in the world is everything about what we're doing right now tries to force us to look at everything under the microscope, the way that I always phrase it is like, stop looking at things under a microscope and look at it from a satellite. Just if you can learn how to mentally step back from what's right in front of your nose and look at it over the course of a longer time period, like from a satellite, you're going to feel differently about it. It's not going to feel as urgent. It's not going to feel as scary or whatever. And I definitely think reading is a way to do that. It's a way to escape from the chaos of modern life. It's very difficult to read. You can watch a movie and still be thinking about something else.
Mm-hmm.
You can scroll social media and still be thinking about something else. You can be talking to your spouse and still be thinking about something else. You can't really read and think about anything else.
Right.
It's one of the few things that are healthy. There's some damaging things like gambling or pornography or whatever that offer that kind of escape, but um, you know reading is a very healthy way to, almost like therapy, where you can't really read and think about something else at the same time. And so it does give you, I think that's where a lot of the angst comes from today, is that we're just constantly bombarded with stuff, marketing, advertising, bad news, drama. I think just having a way to step back from that and take a mental break from that barrage of information is therapeutic in itself. No matter what you're reading, you read a comic book, I think there's too much emphasis on what we're reading and not enough on just the act of reading.
Yeah,
Just
exactly.
read something.
Yeah. Number 2, he says, reading multiplies our experiences. We don't generally experience life very quickly. Building anything of value as a leader takes time, and the process is typically challenging and messy. However, by reading, we can learn from experiences of virtually unlimited numbers of successful parents and married couples. He in there he talks about parenting and how to raise a child. But we don't know. And I think again that goes back to what you said. People are asking, "Hey, how are you know how to do all this stuff?" You're only you're only 25. You don't have the life experience. So how do you know how to do this? And it's through reading.
Mm-hmm. I think to put it in a context that I think anybody can relate to is, we've all watched, the first time you watched a movie like Braveheart, right? Like, dude, when it's over, you can't watch anything else.
Yeah.
You can't go do anything else that night. Like, you just kind of sit there, just stunned, And we've all had that experience with a great movie, I feel like. So for the people listening to this that don't read, to try to relate it to them, like, that's really what I think he's referring to in that is, reading is a way to just so fully embrace somebody else's experiences, because the difference between reading and movies, especially fictional books like I've talked about, is like fictional books, you're inside their thoughts too. It's not just the dialogue,
right.
So you really do feel like when you're done, you've been living inside this other person's experiences, because you're hearing their thoughts, you're hearing their internal dialogues, you're hearing their doubts, their battles, their struggles, and there's no other corollary for that type of like embodiment of someone else's experiences. Like in movies, you're an observer. In fictional books, you're a participant. So when you're done, you feel like you forgot who you were and you were Harry Potter for that 5-hour time span. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so it's a completely, and that's the important distinction I would make on that comment, is living through someone else's experiences. In a book, you are in their mind with them, not just listening to them. And that very much gets you outside of yourself and helps you embody their experiences. And so when they learn something, you feel like you learned something with them.
Yeah. And that goes to with the number 3. I'll go through these fairly quickly because I got a couple of things I want to talk about here at the end before we close. But he says reading allows us to spend time with smart people. You can't always go to lunch with Michael Hyatt, Dave Ramsey, Jim Collins, Peter Drucker. There's a few that he names, but you can spend as much time by reading their material. And then number 4, he says reading can quickly build our expertise. Our expertise will be limited to direct experiences. We don't experience life quickly, so our experiences will be limited. But reading opens that up. And then I think to go back to number 5 again. I think you'll really appreciate this one. He says reading gives us an escape. When we think of reading for leaders, we normally think about nonfiction, such as leadership principles, self-improvement, biographies, etc. However, I believe it's important to read fiction. Fiction reading provides an escape. It helps you to mentally disengage from your circumstances, which facilitates rest and recovery. When you come back to real life, you can face your challenges with new ideas, renewed energy, and renewed focus.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's it. You talked about that.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you hear a lot of emphasis on mindfulness, and just trying to detach from the chaos. I think reading is it's a really easy way to detach, like I said, I can do almost anything else. And if I'm stressed from work, I'm really still thinking about work, reading, at least for me, is one of the few things where I cannot read and think about anything else. I can't do it, you know.
Yeah.
So it's a way to practice mindfulness for me. It's more effective for me than just sitting and trying to be mindful and like, don't think about anything, don't think about anything, you know, like be in
Right.
the moment, just
Exactly.
breathe. Like that's hard for me, you know, but just jumping into it, you know, like, and for me, like one thing I would say, I read on my Kindle on my phone
Yeah.
because I have it with me all the time. I can highlight right there. I can select a passage and make notes, and like so it's almost like a journal.
Yeah.
And I can read comic books on there. Like, dude, I've downloaded comic books through Amazon, and I've just read comic books on my phone on Kindle. If I'm mentally drained and I don't have the mental energy to read something that's demanding, then I literally will just read a comic book, you know,
Yeah.
and it's just it's something to do. Um, and yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's a lot to that from just a therapeutic standpoint, just as an escape like that,
Yeah.
people need, man. People need escapes right now desperately.
Oh yeah, most definitely. One last thing I want to mention and talk about, and it was a goal of mine. I don't think I turned 39 this year, so I don't think that I'm going to hit that goal. But that's okay because it's not really any doesn't have any significance on really the future impact of my life. But 40 under 40, you got 40 under 40 in 21. Is that right?
Yes.
So talk just a little bit about that experience. What was that like? Just because I mean, you think about that's a statewide thing. I don't know if they do it in all of the states, but in Arkansas, to have be picked 40 people of business people under 40. I mean, that's a pretty major, pretty big accomplishment. So share a little bit about that, and just kind of how your life experiences kind of led to that.
Oh man. I became aware that it was a thing when I first got into the business world. You know, I was probably 26 or 27 when I became aware that that was even a deal. You know, and so for me, I, I'm very competitive. You know, I was an athlete, so like it helps me to know there's a contest. Like
Right.
it gives me like a point of focus. Um, you know, and I'm big on perspectives like that. You know, like it's easy to get in shape if you know you're going to the beach in 3 months. Like, you know, um, so those things like that, I'll play mind games with myself just as something to give me like a target to aim at. Um, for me personally, the journey to the target is more valuable than achieving the target. You know, like
Yeah.
actually being named to the 40 under 40 list. I mean, it was cool. It was cool, but I think more than anything else, it was. I think it was interesting to other people more than it was to me. You know, because I've been pretty under the radar. Like if you look at my Facebook over the course of the last 10 years, like I don't flex a lot of stuff. You
Right.
know, I'm kind of just under the radar. And so I think for me, it was one of those things that's probably when a lot of the people, when I mentioned earlier, people started coming out of the woodwork and asking me for advice and stuff. Like, I think it elevated, you know, people's perception of me kind of suddenly because most people didn't even know that I really owned a business or what it was until then, you know, because I haven't been, you know, a big
Right.
self promotion guy.
Exactly.
Um, and and so that to me is probably the biggest change I've seen is just the way other people have responded. Like, man, I didn't know you were actually like good at business. You know what I mean?
You're like,
But that,
what did you think of me before then? Good grief, you know?
yeah, yeah. So that you know, as far as accomplishing it, it was almost a little bit surreal. You know, it's like, oh, okay, like, cool. I hit the target. You know,
Yeah.
and that was kind of the end of it for me. The interesting thing was you know, the people in my, you know, in my vicinity, their response to it was like, I didn't know you were like good at business, or
Yeah.
you know what I mean.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I think the journey to the target is way more valuable than the target itself.
I think that's good. I think that's good.
Yeah.
Um, any advice for that leader or entrepreneur who's listening? What couple of pieces of advice would you give to them?
Oh man. Well, number one, I would say think think for yourself. Do what makes the most sense to you, and stop trying to just follow the recipe of how everybody else says it's supposed to be done. You know, um, if everybody else is doing something, if you know what everybody else is doing, then everybody else knows what knows that too. So you're going to be average.
Right.
If you want to be different, you've got to do something that nobody else is doing. And the only way you're going to do something that nobody else is doing is if you come up with it yourself. You can't read it in a book. You can't find it on social media, because if you read it in a book, somebody else has read it in a book, and you're going to be just like everybody else. You got to do something that nobody else is doing. And the only way to do that is for you to you know, think about it for yourself, and figure it out. The other thing would be, just because you want something to be true doesn't mean that it is. I see a lot of business people that they really, really want this idea to work, and it's just not realistic. You know, like, there's a reason we don't have a Whole Foods in Fort Smith.
Yeah.
Because the people that live here are not the right group of people to shop for high-end food at a high price.
Right.
You got to know your audience, you know. And I see a lot of business owners start stuff that's like, yeah, man, I know you went to do that in Fayetteville, in Northwest Arkansas, and it was packed up there. Just because you want that here doesn't mean it's going to work here.
Yeah.
You know, and so those are just off the top of my head. Those would be
Sure.
the first two things. Just because you want something to work doesn't mean that it will.
Yeah.
And no amount of passion is going to change that. Like,
Right.
you've got to be realistic about it.
Yeah.
Um,
How can people get a hold of you? Social media, email, whatever. How can people follow you? Where can they find you at?
The title of the book is The Wisdom of Kings, but it's Kings apostrophe S. So it's kind of a play on words to love the legacy for my family. I want to write something that I give to my boys that then they teach to their children, and then they teach to their children, like the wisdom of our family. And so it's possessive. So it's The Wisdom of Kings. Now on Instagram, they don't let apostrophes happen, but that's my handle on Instagram, is The Wisdom of Kings.
Okay.
And that's the best way right now. I don't have a lot of the different channels for distribution of content going yet. I don't have YouTube. I don't have a podcast or Twitter. I'm kind of honing in on the Instagram thing first, and then going to spread out from there. So
what's the plan?
Instagram at
what's
the Wisdom
the
of Kings.
book release date plan? What are you thinking? What's your goal?
I don't have a timeline yet.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think what I want to do is I'm playing with a couple different things. I'm either going to self-publish it and let it just be what it is, or if the Instagram thing keeps going like it's going, then I'm going to try to make it huge. I know to be on the New York Times bestseller list, you got to sell 5,000 copies in the first week. And so depending on how the next year goes with Instagram, if I've got, 120,000 Instagram followers and I can get 5,000 pre-orders, through a public and get it published and be on the New York Times bestseller list, if that's an option, then I'm going to go that route.
That'd be cool.
But I'm going to, I'm going to give it 6 or 8 months of this and see if that's something that's like a realistic target to try to aim at.
Yeah.
And then if not, I'm just, if it's not going to be a New York Times bestseller, for me, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it big.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
if it's not going to track like that, then I'll probably just self-publish it and just let it be what it is, but I'm kind of just playing it by ear right now to see what the lay of the land looks like here in the next few months.
Well, man, thanks for taking the time to be on. It's been
Absolutely.
enjoyable. I've enjoyed it, and I look forward to many more episodes with you on as the book progresses, as things progress. So If
that
you
sounds good.
guys want to find him, like I said, the Wisdom of Kings, Kings, the Wisdom of Kings on Instagram. The best way to follow him there. If you're not following, I would encourage you to do it because, again, Ryan, you put stuff out about every couple of days or so, I think, on there, and there's several things to read from. I get on there. I'll confess, I get on there and I scroll through and I screenshot them on my phone so that I can go back later on and look at them and stuff. So.
Well, that's cool, man.
You know, I do screenshot that. So, anyways, thanks for your time today. Thanks for being on. And guys, go out and follow Ryan on the Wisdom of Kings at Instagram. So, take care, guys. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Chris Logsdon Leadership Podcast. Make sure you subscribe and follow to get notifications for each upcoming episode. Reach out to Chris at chrislogsdon.com and follow on Instagram at Chris Logsdon. We'll see you next time for the Chris Logsdon Leadership Podcast.